Hi there! Welcome to Inside Archaeology and today's video on the great site of Giza. Usually when people talk about this place, they focus on its four most popular monuments, the Sphinx and the pyramids of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura. But today, I instead want to talk about the parts that are often overlooked or perhaps not even mentioned when you're taking your tour or learning about the site. Giza has been explored and excavated more thoroughly than any other site in Egypt, possibly more than any other site in the world, and it has a lot more to offer to the archaeological record than just three giant tombs and the world's biggest cat statue. In case you're new here, my name is Rachel, I'm an archaeologist, I visited Giza, and I have studied the ancient Egyptian civilization. I wanted to make this video partly because whenever you hear people try to claim that the pyramids aren't man-made or are perhaps interstellar solar batteries, the people selling these ideas like to specifically omit a lot of information about the wider site, which provides a huge amount of context to what we know about the pyramids and thus are part of how and why we know that they're tombs and not time machines. Plus, there's some really cool stuff that's been found, which is great since the pyramids themselves have been pretty much empty for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. Today, I'm going to cover the historical use of the site, its geography, layout, what it actually contains, and its excavation history before digging into the various cemeteries, worker settlements, queens' tombs, and pyramid towns that also are in the area. Before we break ground, please consider supporting me by subscribing to my channel to learn more about real archaeology. Also, if you like this video, please take a moment to hit like or share it. If you're feeling extra generous, all super thanks are Ko-fi donations and sales of Redbubble merch. All links to everything can be found in the description. Go back into improving and promoting the channel. For example, this is my first video filmed on my brand new camera that I bought just from money that I've made through the channel. I'm really excited to have this new piece of kit, so let me know, you guys, if you're, especially if you've been here for a while, if you notice a difference between videos from before and videos now. Okay, everyone, let's dig in. The Giza Plateau first appears in the archaeological record roughly 5,000 years ago. 4 jars from the prehistoric Mahdi culture have been found at the foot of the Great Pyramid, which are likely from a disturbed earlier settlement. Further evidence of a Mahdi settlement has been found and radiocarbon dated to around 3800 to 3400 BCE, and this was found nearby during work on the Greater Cairo wastewater project. However, it's not until roughly between 2600 to 2500 BCE that the site becomes the subject of the major building works which make it famous today. Giza was chosen by Khufu, second king of the 4th dynasty, as the site of his pyramid, a kingly burial tradition begun around 100 years earlier by King Djoser with his stepped pyramid at Saqqara. The relative peace and prosperity of the 3rd dynasty allowed the 4th dynasty rulers the leisure to explore artistic, cultural, and architectural pursuits like this, which don't really generate an obvious income. The building of 3 different pyramids for Khufu's father, King Snofru, led to the evolution from the step pyramid style to the smooth-sided true pyramids that Egypt is most famous for. No other period in Egypt's history has equaled this family's architectural accomplishments. Prior to Khufu, the tradition had been for each king to build his pyramid at a different site to that of his predecessor. Snofru built at Meidum and Dashur. Khufu chose Giza. So, next question would be, why this spot? Geographically and geologically speaking, the site is located southwest of modern Cairo, where a limestone cliff abruptly rises 60 meters above sea level to form a sandy desert plateau. It forms the northernmost of the 16,000-hectare pyramid fields in the western desert edge of the Nile Valley. The ancient Egyptians called this place Ementet, the West, or Ker Neter, the necropolis, which is actually a Greek word that we now use that translates to City of the Dead. The exact meaning of its modern name of Giza is actually unknown. Why did they pick this spot? Well, there are a few different reasons. One, while we might think of limestone as a relatively soft rock, it's still hard enough to bear the massive weight of monumental structures without collapsing, something which had already potentially happened to Snofru's pyramid at Meidum. Secondly, its surface was already relatively uniform and level before work began, and thus it required less effort to level it. Thirdly, areas not reserved for the actual monument could be quarried to produce and source limestone for the project, meaning you don't have to transport it from super far away. And fourth, its height means that it was in no danger of being flooded by the Nile, but it was still in close proximity to the river, meaning they could use the ancient Egyptians' highway, the Nile, for transport of other goods necessary for the project. In fact, the Diary of Merer, a papyri discovered at a Khufu Age port on the Red Sea coast, describes the existence of a harbor complex called Rosh Khufu, meaning entrance to the lake or basin of Khufu. Recent paleoecological work has reconstructed the 8,000-year fluvial history of the Nile at Giza, showing that the former waterscapes and higher river levels around 4,500 years ago would have allowed engineers to exploit a former channel of the Nile and harness the annual 7-meter rise water level during the flood, meaning they could essentially use it like a hydraulic lift, making it even easier to transport supplies and building materials directly to the site. Did you know that each pyramid actually has its own name? What we know as the Great Pyramid was called Khufu's Horizon. For an unknown reason, Khufu's son and then grandson chose to build their pyramid complexes called Great is Khafra and Menkaure Divine, known to us as Khafra and Menkaure's pyramids, at Giza as well. Queen Hetepheres of the 5th dynasty, who we will discuss in detail later, built her tomb here as well. It's important to remember that pyramids are not standalone structures. They are each part of a much larger funerary complex that includes a temple at the base of the pyramid itself, enclosure walls and corridors, smaller satellite or queen's pyramids, and a valley temple to the east connected to the pyramid temple by a causeway. All these structures needed to be built from scratch, meaning that this site spent over 100 years as a hub of kingly activity. And since they set the fashion, it also became a popular burial site for the royal family and bureaucratic elite, whose shaft and brick mastaba tombs are less grand, but contain much more archaeological information than those of the kings. These were made both while the royal monuments were being constructed and for centuries afterward. Such a long history of construction activity meant that there was a need for permanent settlements for the workforce building these monuments, as well as for quarries for the stone and industrial areas. After the pyramid complexes were complete, the presence of priests working at the valley and pyramid temples of the funerary cults of the deceased kings meant that there was a continued occupation and use of the site for hundreds of years after the major construction work finished. It wasn't a case where they were just kind of like, oh, okay, we're done here, we're moving on to the next one. However, nothing lasts forever, except perhaps the pyramids themselves. And as the ruling dynasties changed and the funerary cults of the kings were defunded, the site slowly depopulated as the focus shifted elsewhere. 1,000 years later, the Sphinx became the focal point of religious dedication in the new kingdom. Kings erected buildings nearby, and royal and non-royal people alike set up engraved stone slabs known as stelae as expressions of their devotion. The late period also saw a renewed interest in old traditions, which prompted a revival of burial activity at the site. Older monuments were refurbished or expanded, and new burial shafts were sunk into the plateau. From the 6th century BCE onward, 2,000 years after Khufu died, Greek tourists visited and admired the pyramids and eventually named the Great Pyramid as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Given their size and prominence in the landscape, Giza and its pyramids were never lost to the sands of time. However, after the pharaonic times, they went through a long period of general neglect and disinterest. They were most likely robbed in antiquity, and their purpose was eventually forgotten for hundreds of years. The site was brought back into the forefront of modern Western history and interest in 1798 when Napoleon invaded Egypt. He brought with him a small army of scientists and scholars who recorded the natural and cultural landscapes of Egypt, including its history. Their findings include some of the earliest academic documentation of Giza's landscape and monuments, not to mention the Rosetta Stone, which subsequently allowed us to decipher hieroglyphs. Exploration of the site continued into the 1800s. Giovanni Caviglia completed the first systemic clearance of sand from the Sphinx's forelegs and found the dream stele of King Thutmose IV. He also exposed many mastaba tombs and entered some of the Great Pyramid's interior chambers. However, he caused as much damage as discovery because his favorite method for getting past obstacles was using dynamite. In 1818, Giovanni Belzoni cleared an entrance to Khafra's pyramid and reached the burial chamber. In the 1830s, Howard Weiss and John Perring explored the 3 large pyramids and other monuments, recording their activities with excellent attention to detail, but also applying liberal use of gunpowder and dynamite to find entrances and chambers. In 1837, they found ancient workers' graffiti in the relieving chambers above the burial chamber of the Great Pyramid, which helped us identify Khufu as the monument's owner. In the 1880s, Flinders Petrie produced the most accurate survey of the pyramids up to that point. In 1903, the Egyptian Antiquities Service divided the site into 3 equal sections for excavation. The Western Cemetery was divided into 3, and these sections were allotted by luck of the draw. And then the 3 pyramid complexes and other surrounding cemeteries were allotted by negotiation. George Reisner received the northernmost cemetery sector and Menkaura's pyramid. George Steindorf received the middle section and Khafra's pyramid, as well as the area behind the Sphinx. And Ernesto Schiaparelli received the southernmost section, the Khufu pyramid, and the eastern cemetery. At first, there was no standard numbering system for keeping track of and recording tombs across the entire site. George Reisner is the one who developed a more consistent numbering system, which is the one that we still use today. And in it, each tomb is classified by the letter G, followed by 4 digits. From 1912 to 1914 and 1925 to 1929, Hermann Juncker excavated in the central section of the Western Cemetery. In 1950, clearance work identified 2 long boat pits covered with massive stone slabs near Khufu's pyramid. In 1954, the eastern pit's contents were identified. A large, dismantled cedarwood boat in over 1,200 pieces. It is one of the oldest, largest, and best preserved vessels from antiquity and is the world's oldest intact ship. It has been described as a masterpiece of woodcraft that could sail today if it was put on a lake or a river. It has been reconstructed and can be seen in the new Grand Egyptian Museum. In the 1970s, working to the south of the Menkaura Causeway, Abdel Aziz Sella uncovered possible evidence of an industrial settlement, including the remains of houses, storage and cooking facilities, and stoneworking debris. In 1987, Dr. Zahi Hawass launched the first site management plan for the whole plateau and oversaw excavations in several areas. During the 1990s, his work uncovered what is now known as the Cemetery of the Pyramid Builders. More on that later. In 1985, Mark Lenner embarked on the Giza Plateau Mapping Project. He also formed the Ancient Egypt Research Associates, ERA, organization, whose ongoing work aims to understand the socioeconomics behind the development of the site through its settlements. Having set the first survey grid for the whole spatial control of the plateau, his teams have excavated or re-excavated various areas to advance study with modern methodologies and technologies. His most prominent work has been on the site of Hayt el Khurab, the so-called lost city of the pyramids. It is a large, multifaceted 4th dynasty contemporary settlement located to the south of the Sphinx. Additional areas of work include the pyramid town of Queen Hetepheres, the Menkaura Valley Temple, and Giza harbor areas that front the Sphinx and neighboring temples. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the 3 cemeteries on the site, which altogether host over 6,000 tombs. The cemetery to the west of the Great Pyramid is the largest of the Old Kingdom cemeteries and contains many mortuary chapels of high-status officials of the 4th dynasty. According to George Reisner, when the site was divided in 1903, it was the primary area in which all were interested in excavating. It's formed by long, intersecting streets of mastabas laid out like modern city blocks. It is dominated by the massive mastaba G2000, which was undecorated but appears to have been built for a person of very high rank. So far, its most notable occupant is Prince Hemiunu, grandson of Snofru and nephew of Khufu. He served as a vizier for his uncle. His tomb lies close to Khufu's pyramid and contains reliefs of his image. Some stones of his badly damaged mastaba are marked with dates referring to Khufu's reign. In 1912, a 1.5-meter high statue was found which shows him seated on a block throne with his right hand decisively clenched and his left hand resting on his knee. It is well preserved apart from damage to his head and eyes by looters prying out gems and gold, and it's notable for its realism, as his features are only lightly stylized and he is depicted as being overweight, which is a large contrast with the more idealized representation of men that we see in royal portraiture. It is inscribed with a list of his titles, including King Sealbearer, Keeper of the Apis Bull, High Priest of Thoth, whom his lord loves, Overseer of Royal Scribes, Director of Music of the South and North, Overseer of all construction projects of the king, and king's grandson of his own body. The second title from the last is perhaps the most important, as it implies that he was the overseer in charge of the building the burial place of the king, amongst other monuments. As a result, Hemiunu is often called the architect responsible for the Great Pyramid, although personally, I think he was probably more likely to be the project manager, but that's just my opinion. The Eastern Cemetery is located to, you guessed it, the east of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and was also a burial place for some of the family members of Khufu. This cemetery also includes mastabas from tenants and priests of the pyramids dated to the 5th and 6th dynasty. Also included here are the pyramids of 3 of Khufu's queens, which were usually constructed to the south of the king's pyramid, but in this instance, a quarry was in the way, and the construction of the smaller pyramids was then relocated to the east. The earliest part of the cemetery consisted of 12 mastabas which were built as double mastabas. The construction of these tombs has been dated to roughly years 17 to 24 of the reign of Khufu. 2 more twin mastabas were then added, and the rest of the eastern field was built around this group of 8. Of these, the great mastaba G7510 of the Prince and Vizier Ankaf stands out due to its size. The tomb of Queen Meresonk III contains quarry inscriptions dating to the 13th year of Khafra. On the map here, the little dot that you see between the Queen's pyramids and the mastabas represents tomb G7000X, the burial shaft tomb of Queen Hetepheres I, Khufu's mother. It was found in 1925 when a staff excavation photographer noticed a patch of plaster where he was expecting limestone. Clearing the sand and removing the plaster, after clearing the sand and removing the plaster, a 26-meter deep shaft was revealed. At the bottom, behind a masonry wall, was a jumble of grave goods, including a white alabaster sarcophagus, gold-encased rods, gold wooden furniture, and more. An inscription naming Snofru was also found. The excavation leader concluded that this represented a secret reburial, possibly because robbers had gotten into the original tomb. By April, the owner of the tomb was identified as Hetepheres, wife of Snofru and mother of Khufu. In 1927, the team gathered to open the sarcophagus only to find that it was empty, not something you'd expect considering that her grave goods were intact. This day, we don't know what happened. The contents of the shaft tomb provide us with many details of the luxury and ways of life of royal members of the 4th dynasty. A key item worth briefly mentioning here is the canopic chest, a large square box with 4 smaller square compartments inside that would have held her internal organs. This is one of the oldest examples known. The items found in the tomb are on display at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, some of which have been restored and recreated. You can also visit replicas of the main funerary furnishings in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts. The tomb's artifacts included an inscribed golden bed canopy, a gold-covered bed with an inlaid footboard, an inscribed curtain box inlaid with faience showing the king seated on the north end and the names in a wing disc on the south end, a gold-covered armchair with papyrus flower decoration, another gold-covered armchair with inlays of Neath standards, and a hawk standing on a palm column on the arms, a gold-covered chair and palanquin, and more. One of my favorite is the box containing Deben rings. Deben was one of the standardized weights Egyptians used to determine an item's value in their barter economy. 20 Deben rings, or bracelets, were originally found inside this box, one set of 10 for each arm. They are made of silver inlaid with turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli stones, forming the decorative figures of butterflies. At least 4 insects are shown on each bracelet. Nothing like this has been found in the Old Kingdom. Even today, they are a unique artifact. The Central Field Cemetery is generally bounded on the north by Khafra's Causeway and to the south by Queen Hetepheres' Pyramid Town. Before becoming a cemetery, it also hosted some large stone quarries that provided the stones for the construction of the first 2 pyramids. Hence, the tombs date to the later part of the 4th dynasty and onward. Within this cemetery, you can find the tombs of several queens and royal children. There are many doorways with inscriptions of the tomb owners and even rock-cut statues. In the middle, there is a street of priests which leads up to a large rock-cut tomb with a courtyard. To the north and adjacent to the rock-cut tomb, there is another very large mastaba that was the last resting place of an individual named Voir. Many smaller mastaba tombs can be seen to the south when walking down Khafra's Causeway towards the Sphinx. The southern edge of the central field is dominated by the huge tomb of Queen Hetepheres, a royal woman who lived in ancient Egypt during the 4th and 5th dynasties. She may have been a daughter of King Menkaura and wife of the successive kings Shepsetkaf and Userkaf, and mother of King Sahura. Her identity as Menkaura's daughter has been proposed due to her funerary complex's close proximity to his, and her complex includes a tomb, a causeway, a boat pit, a valley temple, and a pyramid town. The tomb itself is a 2-stepped superstructure, which cannot be properly classified either as a mastaba or as a pyramid. It bears a resemblance to both a private and a royal tomb, and it was clearly built in 2 phases coinciding with each of the 2 steps. It was originally known as the 4th Pyramid of Giza. In the first phase, a nearly square block of bedrock, around which the stone had been quarried for the other pyramids, was utilized and encased in fine white Tura limestone. In the second phase, it was enlarged and a large limestone structure was built on top of the bedrock. A chapel was built into the tomb superstructure with a large granite entrance bearing the queen's name and titles. Inside the chapel, the walls were covered in relief, but very badly damaged. The passage to the burial chamber and the chamber itself were lined in red granite. On a doorway leading into the tomb, Hetepheres is given the titles that may be read either as Mother of 2 Kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, or the King of Upper and Lower Egypt and the Mother of 2 Kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. Furthermore, her depiction on this doorway also gives her the full symbolic trappings of kingship, including the false beard of a king. This is why some Egyptologists suggest that she reigned as king or perhaps as a regent on behalf of her son. Others argue that this was not the case, as her name does not appear within a cartouche or on any king list. Her burial chamber probably housed an alabaster sarcophagus, as many pieces of it were found in the sand and debris that filled the chamber, but her body is sadly missing. Immediately to the east of her tomb lies an L-shaped settlement of mud brick houses built in a linear fashion and enclosed by a perimeter wall. This is often called a pyramid town or city. 10 of the town's houses lined the causeway and are split into 2 groups. The first 6 homes each had 2 entrances, a porter's lobby, a reception, a living room, bedrooms, an open court, a kitchen, a water reservoir, and a domestic office. Minor deviations existed, but they otherwise conform to this standard plan. The remaining 4 houses have a similar plan, but don't have a lobby and a reception room. These were probably the homes of priests and servants of the pyramid complex. The town was constructed towards the end of the 4th dynasty or beginning of the 5th, and it seems to have been functioning well into the 6th dynasty. A popular question to ask is who built the pyramids? And while the Greeks started the myth that it was slaves, and modern conspiracy theorists think it was aliens or Atlanteans, the actual answer is the Egyptians. So then you might be logically asking, why would they do this? Well, throughout much of their history, their economy was focused on agriculture and was heavily reliant on the Nile flood cycle. Every year from June to September, when the river flooded the fields along its banks, farmers, who made up the majority of the population, could not work since their fields were underwater, but they still needed to effectively pay taxes. So instead of paying in food, they paid in labor. In the 4th dynasty, they were sent to build the pyramids, functioning as a temporary but gigantic workforce that completed jobs that required manpower but not a lot of skill, like moving huge blocks of stone. And while working on these projects, they were fed, dressed, and provided shelter at the expense of the state. There was also a need for a certain amount of expertise in stonemasonry and engineering, which was provided by a smaller skilled workforce that would have worked year round. Since building just the pyramids themselves took around 67 years, this work would have represented a great amount of job security for someone like a stonemason, especially when you consider that the average lifespan would have been around 40 or 50 years old. Another question people like to ask is, how were the pyramids built? Without understanding that this is something that is really hard to determine archaeologically. Unfortunately, the Egyptians didn't leave behind a papyrus scroll called Building Pyramids for Dummies, which is apparently the only proof that certain pseudo-archaeologists will accept. The real archaeologists aren't so narrow-minded. In the 1980s, they started asking, where was the project compound? Where did the workers live? And this approach focuses on finding the remnants of all the people, the administrators, overseeing the work, the managers, the craftsmen, the cooks, the laborers, who would have made these monuments, rather than focusing on the methods that they used. Logically, it makes sense that at least some of the pyramid workforce would have lived close to the site, as a lengthy commute makes for a slow progress, and while the Egyptians believed a king's soul was eternal, his earthly body was not. That doesn't mean we haven't looked into the methods as well. If you want to learn more about the experimental archaeology and research into pyramid building methods, you should watch my video about the building of the Great Pyramid, which is linked here and in the description. In December 1988, a team led by Mark Lenner began digging 400 meters south of the Sphinx near a Cyclopean monumental stone wall known as the Wall of the Crow. Soon, an urban settlement was found that sprawled across more than 7 hectares. Analysis of the pottery, seal impressions, and stratigraphy led the excavators to conclude that it was constructed and occupied sometime during the reigns of Khafra and Menkaura, and underneath are the remains of an even older settlement which might date to Khufu. Houses, magazines, 3 main streets, and a royal administrative building were discovered within the city walls, as were 4 huge galleries which might have been the barracks in which the seasonal laborers slept and prepared their food. An enormous amount of fish, bird, cattle, sheep, goat, and pig bones were found, revealing that the state ensured that the workers were in good health so they could fulfill their physically demanding responsibilities. Named Hayt al-Hurab by archaeologists, this vast town would have not only housed the pyramid workers, but also those who sustained the town and its workforce. The streets and alleyways were lined with craft workshops, industrial yards, bakeries, commissaries, kitchens, warehouses, small houses, and stately homes for site administrators. Massive royal silos stood in a large compound where the grain was distributed to create the beer and bread that was used to help feed this massive workforce. A port to the diverted Nile Channel was also found. On the hillside immediately to the west is the town cemetery, which is the one that was found by Zahi Hawass. The lower part contains around 600 graves for workmen and 30 larger tombs, probably for overseers. The low-ranking overseers of workmen were buried in modest mud brick mastabas, surrounded by even smaller mastaba or domed tombs. The higher-ranking overseers and skilled craftsmen were buried in large stone mastabas higher up on the slope, and their tombs give them titles such as Overseer of the Side of the Pyramid, Director of the Draftsmen, Overseer of Masonry, Director of Workers, and Inspector of the Craftsmen. None of the workers were mummified, but many tombs in this cemetery contain skeletal remains that, when we do osteological analysis, tell us a lot about the lives of these people. Analysis of their bones reveals that males and females were equally represented, mostly buried in the fetal position, with their face to the east and head to the north. Many of the men died between the age of 30 and 35. Skeletons of both men and women, particularly those from the lower burials, show signs of having done heavy labor. Many had signs of degenerative arthritis in the spine, particularly in the lower back and knees, and this was seen more frequently and severely in the skeletons from the mastaba cemetery. Simple and multiple limb fractures were found in skeletons from both upper and lower burial cemeteries, and most of the fractures had healed completely with good realignment of the bone, indicating that the fractures had been set with a splint, which implies that in addition to being well fed, the workers also received very good medical care. It appears that this workforce associated sites were abandoned and demolished after King Shepseskaf moved back to building at Saqqara during the end of the 4th dynasty. Portable tools, equipment, and supplies still of use were carried away, while timbers and mud bricks were pulled out to be reused elsewhere, and this left the walls and roofs to collapse. The fact that this site was in use for such a short time period makes it an invaluable time capsule for learning more about the pyramid builders. Despite all this work and discoveries I've presented today, you might be surprised to know that Giza has not even been fully excavated, even though it's been excavated for like pretty much over 100 years. And even now, we're finding new evidence there on a regular basis. Exactly how big the site is may never be known, as the research, as I said, is nowhere near complete. Preservation efforts and a resurgence of national pride have put a stop to further degradation of the pyramids, as it is believed that had the site not been rawed to provide stone for later building projects, the pyramids would still remain to this day as they were when they were built. As the saying goes, man fears time, but time fears the pyramids. If you're interested in learning more about this site, the meticulous detail of the original excavation recordings, including the field photographs, is available online through Digital Giza, a comprehensive database that is a brainchild of Harvard University and the Museum of Fine Arts Expedition. Ancient Egypt Research Associates, aka ERA, run by Mark Lenner, also has a great website about his work. Okay, time to pack up our tools. That's everything for today. What did you think? Have you been to Giza? Did you learn something new today? Let me know what you thought. Don't forget to comment, like, or subscribe before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, you can give me a super thanks, a Ko-fi donation, or visit my Redbubble shop and pick up a piece of merch designed by myself with your favorite archaeology slogan. Taking a few seconds to support me in any way that you can shows the algorithm that people are interested in real archaeology. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure inside archaeology.